Share my screen here. So welcome one and all again, first Sunday of month of May 2023. Welcome to our Sunday school class. We are going through the whole Bible very slowly. We are taking our time. It's a big Bible. We are taking our time and looking at some of the background information that supports what we're looking at. Our opening scriptures will be back in Genesis chapter 41. If you'd like to find your way there. There we are. So, as always, the Word of God is our ultimate source and authority, trumping all else. We are getting some background info from Egyptologist David Roll, who made some fixes to the established chronology and timeline of the secular world. And when that adjustment is made, all of a sudden, everything lines up with the Bible, which never has to change. So pretty cool stuff there, especially the fact that he's an agnostic, but recognizes these truths about the Bible. So one of the things that I like to do, because I'm a nerd that way, is I like to stop sometimes and take a look back, see where we've been, and be mindful of where we're headed, because it's all one flow. It's all one kind of continuous thing, and it's all connected, and I want to keep it coherent and together. So I pulled up my notes from November 5th of 2017. Yeah, I know. When I first started teaching from creation forward. So that's how long it's taken us to get to where we are right now in Genesis 41. But keep in mind, we were alternating Sunday school classes and all of that stuff. So anyway, when we first got the projector with help and guidance from Brother Corey, by the way, this is actually the same projector y'all have up at Citrus Heights. So we're able to add in some stuff to help flesh out. So here were my thoughts back at the time. I got a kick out of this. For the first time now, with audio-visual aids in place, we're primed to journey through the Bible, through history, through science, wrapped up together as one whole. With all that's ready and available to us now, it'd be a shame to miss out the evidence, the facts, the visuals that are also a vital part of the one truth of all this up to this point. This is all work in progress, bugs and errors still to be cleaned up, so let me know if y'all catch any. I pray this all helps bring the Bible more to life for all of us. While there will be a good deal of information, please don't feel you personally have to master it all. I'm simply introducing it to you. I also don't want to lose anyone, go over anyone's head. So please let me know if that is ever happening. We're not in any hurry. Any one of you is worth taking our time. And all of this is just to give you a richer, fuller picture of the truths you already believe. This class is for you, so please stop me as often as you need. Ask me anything you want or need to. If you're thinking it, odds are someone else is too. Help me help you get the most out of all this. So we see, starting with the timeline given in the Bible, and then when you look and see the evidence that clearly matches it, that saves us from getting lost in a lot of errors. The Bible is not superstition. It is not old-time tradition. It is timeless truth. It does not exist in its own little bubble on the sidelines. Our one Lord of our one faith through our one baptism, he accomplished one truth. Through the interweaving of true science, true scripture, true history, it's all one story. God, our Savior, is also God, the engineer of science, God, the shaper of world history. The Bible is the most accurate science and history book there will ever be. It is not the most complete. That's not its purpose. We want to know more about our Lord, so we're discovering what he did with the science, what we did through the history, through these scriptures and the background to them. So we honor God both by face value, acceptance of his word, and by taking the time to inquire and to appreciate these details. The Bible is true at face value, so we have every reason to expect the evidence to be in line with the Bible when it's properly understood. And that's what we keep finding. And last note I had, evidence is no threat to faith. Sight is no threat to faith. In fact, Paul says in Romans that the opposite of sight is not faith. The opposite of sight is hope. No man hopes for what you already see it. You see it, you don't need to hope for it anymore. And so faith, evidence, and sight are not a threat to our faith. They're actually a praise report that joyfully reinforces the faith we have. So with that little flashback reminder of the attitude and mindset and approach that we kicked in here, definitely want to stay true to that. Let's take a look in Genesis chapter 41. We are in the year 1663 BC, picking off the 7 years of famine with Joseph in Egypt. So Genesis 41, let's review verses 53 to 57. Genesis 41, 53. When the 7 years of plenty, which had taken place in the land of Egypt, came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said, then there was famine in all the lands. But in all the land of Egypt, there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt suffered famine, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, you shall do. When the famine was spread over the entire face of the earth, then Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. And the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Then the people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all the earth. So according to the word of God, this is a big deal. As I've mentioned in previous classes, Joseph coming together with Egypt is a game changer. This is a game changer, as we know, for the Lord's people in this story through the Bible. This is also a game changer for the secular world. Egypt was drastically affected by this. Egypt was not the same after this. So as we are still learning and uncovering the evidence about Egypt, we would expect that when it's properly understood, it'll fit the Bible. And so it does. We see confirmation in secular Egypt records of this moment in time, again, when it's properly understood. So let's take a look at some things. Again, stop me anytime with any thoughts, comments, questions, etc. So in 1663 BC, what's the state of the world right now for this passage we just read? Well, we have folks spread out from the Tower of Babel, which is several centuries earlier. We have folks all the way over in China. They are having their first dynasty. In fact, their first dynasty, the Xia dynasty, it's coming to its end. They've got their last emperor in place now, Emperor Xi, who was not a great guy and pretty much led to the downfall of this dynasty. He's ruling out of the capital of what we know as Anyang today, in that modern city. This is where the Empire of China was being led from while Joseph was in Egypt, when the famine was beginning. So that's over there. We're dealing with folks all over here. So we've got Mesopotamia, the land of Sumer, Shinar over here. We've got the Promised Land here and Egypt over here. So let's dive into some of this stuff. So who are these people we are talking about in this time frame? Egypt is in their 12th dynasty, 12th line of rulers. This is their middle kingdom. They had three main high points. There's the old kingdom with the pyramids. We're several centuries past that now. The pyramids have already been there. They were there for Abraham. So then they had a low point where it was a little chaotic. Now they're in their middle kingdom, another high point period of arts and literature. This is going to collapse. And then the new kingdom will be a period of great conquest. And we'll get to all that when the time comes. But right now, in this middle kingdom, 12th dynasty, we have not one, but two pharaohs. We have a father who brought on his son to co-reign with him. The father is Senuseret III. This is warming up here. And it became a habit after the first ruler of this dynasty was assassinated to go ahead and bring the son earlier on so there's a smooth transition once the old guy passes on. So here are statues of this pharaoh, Senuseret III. And it's going to be very important, as we've talked in prior classes. Notice the expression on his face. Notice how he is portrayed. This is a lot different from the idealized and stylized images of pharaohs before this. Something happened during this time frame. So that's the dad, Senuseret the third. He brought on his son to co-reign with him, and his son's name is referred to as Amenemhat the third. So that's this guy right here. Amenemhat the third, when he was brought on, basically dad kind of takes a backseat, and the son starts to get his feet wet and starts to rule things, and is pretty much the go-to guy while dad's in semi-retirement before he dies. So here is Pharaoh Amenemhat III. This is the Pharaoh of Joseph in the Bible. This is the Pharaoh who had the dreams. This is the Pharaoh who promotes Joseph. This is the guy, Amenemhat III. Notice also with the face, we see the somber expression. We've got larger ears pointing out and hearing what's going on. So something has changed in Egypt, and we'll talk more about that, but do remember that as we go. So back home in the land of Mesopotamia, up in the north, you've got the early days for the kingdom of Assyria. Assyria will later grow up to be so powerful that they're the ones that the Lord uses, sadly, to destroy the 10 tribes in the north of the nation of Israel when they split after Solomon. So here in their early days, they are at their first capital, the capital of Ashur, right here off the Tigris River, and they are currently being ruled by Sargon the First. Our understanding is still a little sketchy for them of this time frame, and Nineveh is right by in Mosul up there where Jonah would later go. So Sargon the First is ruling Assyria while Joseph's in Egypt. We've had two main cities down in the south. They've now been joined by a third. We've got the city of, stop that, let's go to 106. The city of Isin in southern Mesopotamia. Oh, it just switched over to a different lesson. We're not going back to Noah's Ark landing on Mount Judy. That was another lesson for a prior time. We want to go back to that one. And we are on 106, yeah. So Isin, being ruled by a king named Bur-Sin, and we have something from his time frame. They have these things called cylinder seals where they'd be etched into, and then you roll it out in clay and you get a story, you get an image, an event laid out. And so this is the clay seal rollout from King Bur-Sin of Isin, again, during the time while Joseph is in Egypt. So that's some of the artwork from that time frame. And then we have a little further south of Isin, we have Larsa, being led by their king Sumuel, sometimes called Samuel. So Isin's a little further north. Here's Larsa towards the south. And back then too, the Persian Gulf coast was a little further inland than it is now. So there's Larsa. Isin's a little further north of it, and Assyria is much further north. But then we've got a new kid on the block, a young city and early days of a kingdom known as Babylon. This will be the kingdom the Lord uses to conquer the last remaining 2 tribes in the south and Judah. They will be the ones to destroy Solomon's temple. But here they are in their early days, Babylon right over here. There's Isin, there's Larsa and all that. The Tower of Babel is right there, and Eridu. So Babylon is being ruled by their early king, Samu-Abu. Okay, so all these other guys around and about, what about our Bible folks? Well, in 1663 BC, the twin brothers Jacob and Esau are still alive. Esau has separated, and his family has taken over Mount Seir, which will be referred to as Mount Edom, and they are the Edomites. And so Mount Seir is right in this pathway here, on the line between Jerusalem and Mount Sinai to the south. So this is the Mount Seir range. And let's see. So Jacob, while Joseph, his son, is in Egypt, Jacob is over in Hebron, which is where his grandpa Abraham and grandma Sarah are buried, as well as his father Isaac. So Jacob and most of his family are up here in Hebron. Jerusalem's up that way. And Jacob and Esau, the twins, are 128 years old right now. As we know, Jacob had a few sons. One of them, named Judah, is over in this area right here. He is in Chezib, which is just right there off to the side. He's had some adventures with his marriage and kids and whatnot. Judah is now 41 years old. His son Perez is 11 years old. Perez is in the line of Christ. And we've covered from chapter 38 how that all came about. So that leaves our hero Joseph, who is now 38 years old. And Joseph, as he's been promoted to the number 2 in Egypt, is taking up residence over here in the land of Goshen, just outside of Avaris, city called Phocis, right there. So all of that exciting stuff to bring us to what happens. So what do we see with this guy, Amenemhat, and his dad, serious-faced guys, during this time frame that the Bible says was a time of famine, 7 years of famine, in fact? Well, one of the things that happened, these Middle Kingdom pharaohs, they built a series of forts along the Nile. It's divided into different cataracts. So they built these forts down towards the south, down towards Nubia, another country further down south. These strongholds were to protect their frontier. And so, and for it to be launching stations for military campaigns and also for trading expeditions. So further down from the cataract is the kingdom called Cush. Yes, named for Noah's grandson. Sudan has been in the news a bit lately, evacuating of our embassy and all that stuff. Sudan is Cush back in the Bible times here. So Egypt was constantly at war with this other nation down south, Cush. In fact, we'll see later during the lifetime of Moses growing up in Egypt, he seems to have been involved in some military campaigns in Cush. Good practice for going into the promised land and getting up in that area. So they've got all these forts along the Nile. Well, there's one in particular in the Semna area, the Semna Gorge, the Semna Cataract, where we found something really weird. We found along the cliffs, while the Nile is going this way, and remember the Nile goes from south to north, so along these cliffs, we see some hieroglyph markings, and they're marking the water levels of the Nile. Well, what's curious about this, so here's the Semna Gorge, and here's the Semna Cataract, I should say. The gorge was up here. It's now covered by Lake Nasser because of this dam here, the Aswan Dam. But here's the Semna Fort, what it looked like. Well, they had along the cliff, they had markings and hieroglyphs measuring the water level, and they would mention the king and the year of his reign. So it'd say like, Pharaoh Amenemhat, year 20, this was the water level, wherever this hieroglyph was placed. Well, the folks who study these things are kind of scratching their heads. Why did they care about the water levels? And why do they only do it for certain times? Because what they noticed is they started these forts in year 8 of the first king. So, but these markings of the water levels didn't start then. Why did they only start them later? And why did they not do it for every year? And why did they stop? They noticed that some are missing. Okay, they found some fallen from the cliff onto the floor, rocky floor, so they don't know how high up they were, so they don't know what the measurement was. But even when you factor in those, there's a bunch that are missing or just were never done. So what is going on here? Why were only about a third of the flood levels recorded? Remembering the Nile naturally floods every year. The whole calendar is based on this, and they depend on this. The Nile overfloods its banks. It brings nutrients and minerals to the desert area where they can plant and harvest and have their crops. So their livelihood depends on this. So if they get a little extra flooding, bringing more minerals, great. If they get not enough or too much, trouble. Sister Peggy.
Flooding, and being that they're so close to that would be the ocean, right?
This is the Nile River. It's inland from the Red Sea and the Gulf of.
So there would be hurricanes, or they wouldn't have that ocean.
Yeah, the ocean issues. Yeah.
Why would they build so close to the ocean? You know,
Yeah.
It makes sense. And but okay, it's the Nile River, so.
When I was in South Carolina, where I met Ashley, it was kind of fascinating watching how all the hurricanes go right past South Carolina and just right up to North Carolina, right there, Wilmington, where I almost ended up instead of South Carolina. Yeah, they kind of follow that trend. And Yeah, sometimes we could say, who'd want to live in Tornado Alley? Who'd want to live where these hurricanes happen? And then my wife says, yeah, we live in California earthquakes land. So like, but I keep trying to tell her, having grown up here, earthquakes are great. You don't have to pack up, if it happens, it hits and you either lived or died. It's over, easy peasy, right? We get it. Yeah,
But, like the Sea of Galilee was very interesting.
Oh gosh, yes.
Sergio and I forget Rhonda, and they're born and raised in Israel, but they're Christians.
Yeah.
And so they wanted to see how high waves get in the Sea of Galilee, because it's really not a sea, it's a lake.
Yeah, it's a big lake. Yeah.
It's a big lake. But she goes, it's usually fairly calm.
Mm-hmm.
And so a storm was brewing, and they went out to it, and it was impressive because they were thinking, okay, the smaller boats, what could have really, how high could they have really gotten?
Yeah.
For Peter, to not see, I think it was Peter,
Mhm.
and to not see Jesus anymore. But it was impressive because they really got high, like in the ocean.
Oh yeah.
And even though it's not an ocean,
Right.
and but there was enough wind that was able to come up to get those waves. Because I've heard, you hear different things of, oh, they couldn't have gotten that big, or he just
It's just a lake.
It's a lake,
You go water skiing on those. It's all good.
But it was very interesting because they were there and filmed it and everything, and it was just cool to learn about those kinds.
Oh yeah. Water is fascinating. And speaking of, science and all that stuff, this is the only place in the universe where water exists as a liquid. It's out there in outer space. It's there as vapor. It's there as ice. Nowhere in the universe is it liquid except right here for life. Imagine that. And I remember on my ship in the Navy going up to the Arctic Circle. I've shared this before a while ago. How I was just so awestruck because here is height of man's technology. I was in the Navy, late 80s, early 90s. Here's a ship commissioned in 79. And our ship just got its rear end kicked by the water, just by the waves of water. I mean, it dented in. We had one of our shops on the side of the ship, inside, the bulkhead, the outer bulkhead of the ship, but the water was slapping so hard it caved in the wall. They had to use like 13 steel beams to brace the wall to keep it from collapsing. Yeah, our ship had we basically ballasted down our ship, opened our back door, flooded it a little bit, and took on marine boats inside us. It's called a well deck. These two metal doors, like 80 feet across, these doors were being pushed open and water was shooting up inside. So I gained a newfound, you'd see footprints on the wall, the bulkheads. Yeah. So water is amazing. So when we talk about the Red Sea, which by the way, the phrase Red Sea isn't in the Bible. We'll get to all that. But when we see all this, God does amazing things with his creation, and his creation is no joke. We can't destroy the earth. It has enough of its own awesome, powerful force. So and the Nile River is part of that. So a good flood from the Nile, great, extra minerals again, because otherwise throughout the rest of the time it's desert, but not enough or too much, you're in trouble. So everything had been going along fine. What changed for them to start measuring this? So, and by the way, let's see here. So there's that. There's an idea of looking across where you had two forts opposite, and it was between these two that they took these measurements here.
What was the structure that you were showing with the water level?
That was a fort. It was used as they were staging along the Nile to supply and stock up and have armies stationed in case they needed to go down and attack, also to protect trade routes and things like that.
It appeared to be like if the water got certain level, it would flood in and then look like out.
Yeah.
It would come out.
The good news is, great question and point. These cliffs were very high up, so this was actually an ideal place where the bank was lower, it would overflood. It didn't flood here. They're able on the side of the cliff to put the measurements of how high it got, and where here it didn't flood.
On the left side of it, it looks like a place for water to come out.
Mhm.
It floods over the walls or something.
Yeah, so the good news is they didn't have an issue with it overtaking here. We actually have the measurements of where it did get. So, and in fact, the reason this is now underwater is because up here in Aswan, we have dams that were built. A couple of them, in fact. British built a dam in 1902, then raised and widened it in 1912 and 23. This dam here was built by the Soviet Union in 1971. And as we zoom in here, see it's all under the lake here now, Lake Nasser. Here you can see it's all dammed off. Right there with that dam. So that backed up the water to flood and fill in this area all here where the Semna Gorge used to be. So these markings were discovered before all that in the 1800s, and how the markings they saw, okay, a good flood, normal flood, about 39 feet above the low mark, high tide, low tide and all that in the seasonal. So the river surface rose 39 feet in the peak month of flooding, about August, as it passed through that gorge. So when we see that and compare that to what the records were from Amenemhet's time, kind of surprising. During this time, instead of being like 39 feet above normal, it was 62 feet above normal. So a huge rise in the Nile flood levels during Amenemhet III. So during the first 2 decades of his year, the flood levels rose up to about 56 foot above normal, or before they would only go up to 39, they went up to 56. So that was extra flooding, but it was still okay. That was a good flood. It brought more minerals, able to do more. They had years of plenty. Then suddenly something changed where, boom, they had too much flooding and it led to years of famine. So it went an extra 16 feet and that was too much. So here we are, Amenemhet's 20th year, 69 feet above. So we're seeing here, so that extra 13 feet may have been enough to do the damage. There's a lady named Barbara Bell. She was a hydrologist. This is, I think, people who study water and all that stuff. She's an American specialist in these ancient climates. She saw that difference, it brought 3 to 4 times the volume of water out to the areas compared to normal. Certainly would lead to a famine. Water of that level that's recorded would wash away villages, break down dikes and causeways, flood temples, tombs, and palaces. And if it was sustained over a period of time, like the normal season would be, those waters would take longer to subside. You would not be able to plant. No planting, no harvest, famine. So, and she also observed, looking at this time frame, the serious faces of the 2 pharaohs, Senuseret III and his son Amenemhet III. People have wondered about that. Wow, they're really kind of feeling the weight of their kingdoms and the times that are going on. Well, now we know the answer because when we line up the secular history with the Bible, boom, it's the years of famine during the time of Joseph. The Bible gives us the answer to the mystery of Egypt. This is also a little interesting side note. It's during the time of the whole Nile extra flooding and all that, that we start seeing for the first time in the Egyptian world, their crocodile god named Sobek. There is the crocodile god of Egypt. In fact, that right there, this statue of Sobek found at Amenemhet III's sanctuary temple, connected to his pyramid at Hawara in the Fayum. This is where Joseph's water projects, his, what's the word I'm looking for? Irrigation projects to kind of offset the damage from the flood and prepare for the flood. Where all that was happening, he established his pyramid. And we see the Sobek crocodile stuff right there at the same place at the same time. Yeah. And once again, I catch myself, I have a bad habit. I'm still looking at my screen when I got the big screen up there to look at like y'all are, but no, I keep looking at this little thing.
What's the significance of the rock?
The Nile. Crocodiles, the Nile crocodile.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
I do that. It's up on the refrigerator. Not quite. Mummified crocodiles. Mummified crocodiles. Crocodile mummies.
Crocodile jerky.
Yeah, crocodile jerky.
Mummies that were
Yeah.
like they had Muslims on it.
Yeah.
Maybe they're,
Could be, or you say he's dead. I'm just going to make extra sure. Yeah, exactly. I love this. Here is Pharaoh, Amenemhat III, Joseph's Pharaoh of the Nile flooding and the dreams and years of plenty, years of famine, with the crocodile god Sobek. It's like they're posing for a picture here.
Yeah.
And what he's covering the Pharaoh with right there is that symbol of life, the Ankh, or the Anea. Remember, Joseph's Egyptian name, Zatanet Atenea, Joseph, he who is called the one who lives, because Joseph had been presumed dead, and turns out he was alive. So Joseph's name refers to his story in the Bible. And so here we see Sobek, the god, crocodile god, covering Joseph's Pharaoh with the symbol of life. Yeah. And so there we go. That's that guy. So there was a lot of emphasis with all this Nile stuff going on. They want to keep the Nile gods happy, the crocodile god happy. In fact, his daughter, who actually co-reigned with him, yes, a woman pharaoh who co-reigned with him, her name was given as Sobek Kare Sobek Nefiure. Sobek is the spirit of Re, their sun god. Sobek is a perfect form of Re, their sun god. In the next dynasty, the 13th dynasty, the dynasty of that Moses will be a part of and all that, the most common name for the pharaohs was Sobek Hotep. You'll see Sobek Hotep the third, the fourth, and all that. That means Sobek is satisfied. So the pharaohs were trying to satisfy this crocodile god with the Nile that affected so much of their livelihood. Now, in my reaching out, speaking of Israel, I don't know if your friends have made it over here or not, but I discovered something in my zooming out and looking around. So, of course, Israel has the Holy Land. You could walk the paths that Christ walked, incredible, amazing stuff. Of course, there's all sorts of monuments on top of everything, so it's hard to fully appreciate what it was back in the day. But if you go to Israel, you don't want to miss this. Yes, right here in that line with Mount Seir, Jerusalem, and Mount Sinai, 220 miles south of Jerusalem. Here we have Croc-O-Loco, crocodile farm, which is right there. There's Mount Hor and Kadesh, all that stuff. Yes, there is a Croc-O-Loco crocodile farm.
Route 66.
Oh, this is not the petting zoo. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
So crocodiles were a big deal during this time frame. Croc-O-Loco. Yes.
Oh, yes.
Crazy crocs.
Want a souvenir?
I like
Or
her.
some boots.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. So there we have Croc-O-Loco to add to our tourism itinerary. Yes, this guy, I don't know, are those Gryffindor colors? No. This guy got a little far from the Quidditch match for Harry Potter fans. Yay, show and tell. And there we have it. So yeah, crocodiles, a big deal in the Bible lands. And there we have it. So she noticed, this lady, Barbara Bell, she noticed that after the 12th dynasty, the 13th dynasty, they go through rulers like nothing. They don't last very long. So there's kind of a time of chaos after the time of this, which makes sense when we see what happens with Moses later on. So what does the Bible tell us? We just read in Genesis 41 about the years of famine. So we're told, let's see how this fits in with what we've seen in Egypt. Joseph arrives in Egypt, a prisoner of the Midianite caravan. He's sold into slavery. Well, according to this corrected timeline of Egypt, that's during the reign of Pharaoh Senuseret III. While Joseph is serving Potiphar, who's a commander of the armed forces, we know who he is outside the Bible. Senuseret III's son, Amenemhat III, is crowned to co-reign with Dad. So Joseph is then thrown in prison for several years, accused of molesting the wife of his Egyptian master. And it was in Amenemhat III's 13th year, Joseph is released from prison. and promoted to the number 2, the vizier, as a reward for interpreting Pharaoh's dreams. So he had predicted 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine, and we see that playing out with the water levels being measured there at the Semna Gorge. After the year 20 of Amenemhat, that the bad famine started happening because of the bad floods. We also see that Joseph did some things. We see some things that, like power was distributed throughout the kingdom. Their local rulers under the Pharaoh had a lot of power and prestige and built big monuments. That all stops for some reason. All their wealth and power gets centralized under Pharaoh. The Bible gives us the answer. It was Joseph's policy of everything be of the 1/5 of the produce being stored with Pharaoh, and then it would be sold back during the time of famine. So Pharaoh became the high point of power. We see these guys, they're not building these high tombs anymore in these monuments. They lost their power. It's all been centralized. Egypt's history doesn't tell us why. The Bible does. It's what Joseph did. We also see that during this time, a lot of work was done in irrigation. Let's see. The Pharaoh even put his pyramid. He had one pyramid going, but that wasn't working out. So Amenemhat the third had his pyramid right over here. And that's where he was buried. In that pyramid right there off of this canal. And remember that canal. See, crocodiles. So why did the Pharaoh, see, there's this pyramid, there's this canal. Why did it mean something to Pharaoh Amenemhat III to be buried by this canal? Well, this canal was expanded and diverted. See, there's this little, they call it a labyrinth next to his pyramid. That was pretty impressive. So it looks like this canal during his time frame was dug and is spread to divert the water of the Nile in case of high floods, which happened. So we've got all sorts of water projects going on. We've already covered all that. And that canal has a name. And we've talked about this before. The name of that canal is, get that out of the way here. Let's do this, do that. Move that up here and zoom out. To this day, that canal is known as, move up right here, right there. Right there, it says Bar Yusuf. Bar means water. Yusuf means Joseph. This is called to this day the waterway of Joseph. He was the one, as number 2 in Egypt, who oversaw this work being done to divert the floodwaters over to this Fayum basin. In fact, if you take a look over here, you'll see that nice green area. Well, here's the Nile, nice green along the Nile, all sorts of desert around it. Here we see it's being diverted over here and filled in. That was the work of Joseph under the Pharaoh to do some damage control for the time of overflooding. And with that, they were able to minimize the damage. There was still famine in the land, of course. They had to go to Pharaoh for their bread and sustenance. But the worst of it was diverted off here. It's coming from the south to the north. So all of the Egyptian stuff up here, their capital at Chitawi and the pyramids, all that stuff was saved from the overflooding because the waters were diverted. Thank you, Joseph. Again, the Bible gives us the answer for all these things happening in Egypt. And we see these things happening in Egypt. We see it shows Egypt was changed and impacted by our folks from the Bible, our spiritual ancestors. So Joseph in Egypt is a game changer for Egypt and a game changer for us. The Lord is using Joseph to be the deliverer for his people when they're all brought in, so that the Lord can ultimately be the deliverer through Moses to bring his people out. And as it said beautifully later on in Deuteronomy, the Lord says, I brought you out to bring you in. Think of all the things, and it's a beautiful picture of our bondage to sin and our deliverance into the bridal city kingdom, how he brought us out to bring us in. And we were at a place where we were helpless. And through his mighty hand and outstretched arm, he did what we couldn't do. He parted those mighty waters of the sea, and we'll get to all that and the actual name of the sea and all that, and how major that an undertaking that was to do that. And brought through a mighty hand, outstretched arm, brought us out as people spiritually, so that he could bring us into the land he has for us. God never has a situation we go through that he doesn't have a way out or a way through or a destination or a victory outside of. It's just a matter of always looking to him and seeing him through. And when we, as the Lord's people did throughout the Bible, and it happens today, when we take our eyes off God, that's when we get distracted, just like Peter in the water, in the storm of that water, and we start to sink when our eyes aren't on the Lord, who is there faithfully, hand outstretched, to provide and deliver and pull us up and bring us out and bring us through. So that's what's happening here with Joseph and Egypt, with all this going on during the years of famine. Any other reactions, questions, thoughts, or comments from anyone? Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that, so obviously he had, the Pharaoh at that time had something married with the God of Abraham, Joseph's God, right, our God.
Yeah.
And then there's still all this crocodile stuff.
Yeah.
With all these crocodiles dying and multiplying, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's still the God that is providing.
The one who lives. Yes. Joseph is the one who lives, serving the God who lives. I love that point you just made. Yeah. Okay. We're going to have a crocodile God. Well, we've got a lot of crocodile corpses, and we're even mummifying them. Yeah. Why have a God that's an animal that keeps dying? You know, they did the same thing with bulls. If a bull was supposed to be a symbol of the Pharaoh, and if the bull didn't die when the Pharaoh did, they killed the bull. That's crazy stuff. Yeah, because their lives were supposed to be bound. But yeah, and Egypt, we saw these glorious tombs and everything were to prepare the Pharaoh for the underworld. And this is all, and I love how Brother Brassfield brought it out when we were talking about this at the time. Our prior pastor, he said, this is a cult of death. Yes, where our God is a God of life. Life in spite of death, life and victory over death. Here, they're preparing for them to be dead in their afterlife. In fact, we see stone monuments made to look like wood that are permanent representations of where the Pharaoh hung out and did his thing when he was alive. They made a stone one that would last, so the dead Pharaoh's ghost could still hang out there and do his thing. They not only sacrificed their servants when the Pharaoh died, not all of them, but this was a practice, and buried their servants with him so he wouldn't be alone, so he'd have people with him. Yeah, and they even packed extra underwear, I kid you not, and all these different things that are packed with the dead Pharaoh so that he'd be covered and well prepared for his journey. I love the fact that we're leaving everything behind, because there's nothing we're going to be missing. We're not going to show up in heaven and go, oh, I wish I brought this. I forgot I left this behind. Yeah. When I go on preaching trips, like, oh, I forgot this. That's okay. There's a Walmart around the corner here. Cool. We're not going to worry about these things. So I'm so glad you brought that up. It's a beautiful contrast. The one true God of eternity. The way, the truth, the life. Christ, our anointed one, our Messiah, our deliverer. With his mighty hand and outstretched arm. That's what we're about. That's who Joseph recognized. He told Pharaoh, I'm not the one interpreting your dreams. Like Daniel said, this comes from God, the God who's telling you what's going to happen. And his prophecy was the cows and the corn coming out of the Nile. He recognized God is going to use the Nile. God is going to use his creation to accomplish his will for our warning and sometimes even chastisement, and also for our blessing. It's all about our relationship with him and our place with him at that time. So great stuff. Appreciate that very much. Anything else from anyone else? If not, good stopping point for now. We'll stop our share and stop recording and get ready to go to our song service.